Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I got a bunch of stuff to get to. A bombshell exclusive video of Alec P. Baldwin and his wife, his Spanish wife from Boston, having an exchange over this scandal, and a bunch of other stuff to get to. Dude says he got swallowed by a whale. Like, that's all coming up. But let's start here. One of my friends on Facebook sent me this. It's Joe Biden meets Boris Johnson. There they go, masking it up. Walking in. And now, why are they taking off their masks? See, science is either, what's the science behind them walking in with masks and then taking them off? Because as far as I know, and it's confusing, the CDC says if you're vaxxed, you can take off your masks. I mean, that's what it is now in America. Is it different in the G7? And is it okay to take it off when you sit down? Because that's the stuff they've been saying in restaurants, that when you're standing up in a restaurant, you have to have it on. And we're sitting down in a restaurant, you can take it off. And again, where's the science behind that? Like, I mean, that doesn't sound like science at all. It's either you need to wear it or you don't. It doesn't matter whether you're sitting or standing. And they seem to be within 6 feet, maybe, I don't know. But anyways, that's just the first piece to this.
Wow, it's a great pleasure, Mr. President, to welcome you to Cornwall.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
Fantastic to see you here on what I think is your first big overseas trip since you've been.
It is.
President.
I've been to a great country many times, but this is the first time as President of the United States.
How is Joe Biden president? He's just not somebody who deserves to be president.
Well, everybody's absolutely thrilled to see you.
We're thrilled to meet you. Thrilled to meet your wife.
Yes, and
Thrilled to meet your wife. We know what he does. Don't let her grope her, or sniff her hair, or look at him. Pleased to meet your wife. But this is, then there's this.
they've gone off to do something else.
They did. I told the Prime Minister we have something in common. We both married way above our station.
I'm not going to do.
I told the Prime Minister we have something in common. We both married far beyond our station. He says this every time, that his wife is better than him. And now he's saying it to the Prime Minister. Your wife is better than you. We shouldn't have been able to marry women of this high caliber. And then he's got that Joker-like smile and that pathetic laugh, right? When I was a kid, there was like, I don't know, aunts I had or adults, whatever they were. And they would say, hey, you married yet? I'd be like 7 years old. No, yeah, I'm not too young to get married. That's a great joke. You have to give some sort of mercy laugh. And he's looking at everybody like he just killed it, right? Like, what's the joke here? The joke is that your wife is above your station and you married her, which means like what? Like you somehow tricked her into marrying you? Or is it a joke that your wife is above your station, that since you're president, such an important person, And he says this quite often. Oh yeah, I was lucky to marry Jill. She's way above she's out of my league.
I'm going to dissent from that one, Chris. I'm not going to disagree with the president on that, or indeed on anything else. I think it's highly likely.
He's still laughing like he just killed it. He's looking at the room. Do you get my joke? Like he's, Nobody else is laughing, Joe. JoJo Magoo, like just totally Magooing it up here.
Are we going to have we could just continue and generally, I think we're so generally agreed, Joe, we could probably do some stuff.
Again, some people wearing masks, some aren't. Kicking them out. And so what I've heard, and I'm not sure because, this is what the people in the truth community and the right want you to think, that JoJo's being kind of ignored, like he's just walking around, like he did when he wandered off a stage and like nobody respects him at the G7. I don't have any video evidence, but that's what I'm hearing. And so one of my friends on Instagram sent me this. It's from 2020. It's C-SPAN, September 1st, and some dude lights Brian Stelter and CNN up.
And I want to make sure that people who are not living in New York or not living in Atlanta or not living in Portland know about the full picture and not just the narrow picture that's sometimes shown on Fox.
Speaking of Atlanta,
they want to know the full picture that you don't get on Fox, but you get on CNN, because CNN's full spectrum news.
that's where Sean Hannity rose to fame on radio there in
He
Atlanta.
did, yeah.
You write extensively about Sean Hannity, writing this in particular, saying that Hannity and Trump worked hand in hand to tar practically the entire American news media as fake. Both men's hypnotic message was that Fox was the only legit network, while everyone else would fraudulent. How did this...
Brian Stelter write hoax about Fox News, right? He's pitching his book on C-SPAN. Something tells me his book didn't do really well. It's a hoax. Their news is real news, but it's a hoax, the fake news media.
This relationship between Donald Trump and Sean Hannity unfold?
I remember spending an evening with Hannity in Atlanta when I was a reporter at the New York Times. There are stars like Hannity trash the New York Times. They trash CNN. They say these outlets are failing, but they also want the attention of the CNNs and the New York Timeses of the world.
Yeah, Sean Hannity's a stooge. Not like you quality reporters on CNN. You guys don't want any attention. You guys...
That's why Hannity and I have known each other for about 15 years at this point. I think that the Hannity-Trump alliance came about because both men care deeply about the GOP and they care deeply about power. And they've benefited from this relationship that they have, where Trump calls into Hannity and behind the scenes helps produce Hannity's show, gives Hannity talking points and back and forth.
Yeah, I've documented CNN. Well, for example, CNN and Democratic officials calling the audits of the election the big lie. And so when and I'm not saying Fox News sucks, so I'm like, this isn't me saying Fox News is good and Hannity's good. I dislike Hannity. I mean, just as a, blowhard on it, hard to listen to. And none of these guys are truth tellers. But Fox News and CNN both do the same thing, where they repeat the talking points of their chosen party. And when you do that, you've lost any journalistic integrity. You can't repeat talking points, of a political party and call yourself a journalist. There are talking points and they repeat them. And that's wrong on so many levels as a journalist. Even if you believe in those talking points, they're still talking points and you are deceiving your audience. And you are doing it in a way where you're pretending to be a journalist, but you're really pushing out propaganda. And CNN, to me, is the worst at doing this. Fox used to be the worst. I mean, just, they made this stuff up. They were the template for this. They started to just, opinionize the news and be completely right-wing leaning. And CNN and MSNBC were shaking their heads and complaining about it. And Fox News was rolling them in the ratings. And so they adopted this and they went much harder than even Fox. Of course, Fox bailed on Trump at the election. That hadn't happened yet here. This is from September 1st in 2020. But Fox was set to bail on Trump, right, on election night.
I think the problem sometimes is when Hannity does Trump a disservice. For example, some of the seeds of the Ukraine scheme were planted on Fox, on Hannity's show. And as I write in the book Hoax, that's what eventually led to the impeachment inquiry. So I think there are some times when Hannity tries to help President Trump, but actually hurts him. And that's a theme of my book.
Let's hear from Donald, Hickory, North Carolina. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Donald, do us a favor. Make sure you mute your volume there and go ahead with your question or comment for Brian Stelter.
Yeah, I got it.
Good.
There's a couple comments. One about their crayons that they put underneath while people are watching things. Like the other day, they put on fiery but mostly peaceful protest. Yeah, you laugh there, Humpty Dumpty. We all know you're not reliable.
This isn't the guy. This guy's, kind of rude. The other guy lights him up with some facts. But he just called Brian Stelter Humpty Dumpty. So this is, he's on C-SPAN. And I only listened to this section because I can't, one of my friends sent me this and said it starts around 20 minutes in. I went back a little bit because I wanted to get the whole, spectrum of what was going on. But two callers hate CNN. And so these are C-SPAN watchers that have come to confront Brian Stelter. I don't think they have, and they're not screening the calls. It doesn't appear that Brian Stelter has any fans. I heard two callers, and they're both very anti-CNN. So again, I didn't watch the whole thing. And I wonder is there any real legitimate CNN fans? I mean, other than people like me that cover CNN, or I'm sure some people watch it, just, whatever. But are there any really fans that actually believe it, right? They look up to these guys and they think that they're, I find it hard to believe. It's so disingenuous and so boring. Like, even if people aren't smart or not capable of reading what's going on, it's just so boring and unappealing. And so I don't think they have really very many fans out there, actual fans, people who are, Brian Stelter guys or, women or something like this that actually are into him and want to hear what he has to say, like you see on social media. You have lots of people who are in social media, and there's people who really want to hear what they have to say on a daily basis, right? That's all across social media. But how many people are like that? Oh, I gotta get me some Stelter. I gotta hear what Don Lemons and Chris Cuomo's are saying. Really? Like, is there anybody out there that's I want to hear what Cuomo's thinks about this. I want to hear what Stelz's take is on this thing. But when the caller was talking about the cryon, the ticker tape underneath the, whatever it is, the headlines that they put up there. And he was saying that they wrote mostly peaceful protests. He's referring to the stuff that was happening in Seattle and Portland in September of 2020. So this whole thing happened before the election, and of course also before January 6th. And so the way CNN and the mainstream media that wasn't Fox was covering the protests that were happening in Seattle and Portland, the BLM protests and all those things, was, there's no big deal. They were just making them very, mild. And of course the January 6th is an apocalyptic event. And it's the same thing with Fox. It's partisan media. Fox covers it in just the opposite way. And so when you have media that is backing political parties, that is owned by a political party, then it's no longer media. If they're not even trying to be objective, right? They're not trying to look at the other side. And this is far beyond Trump, because you could say, okay, you don't like Trump and that's whatever it is. But when there are riots, and if the left-leaning riots are, Antifa riots are considered, mild, no big deal, just protests, and the right-wing riots are called insurrections, then you have a real problem, because now it's just propaganda.
You are nothing but a stooge for...
We'll let you go there, Donald. He called you Humpty Dumpty.
Humpty Dumpty. Isn't that funny?
Well, tell us.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, the egg-like shaped head. And the high voice is Brian Stelter, Humpty Dumpty. I mean, I think it's a little rude. I wouldn't have done that myself, but it's funny. You guys brought it up, so.
Tell us about that, and he also asked about the chyrons that are on CNN and elsewhere. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, Hannity started calling me Humpty Dumpty years ago. I don't know where it came from. It's kind of funny. I think the idea is that Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, so I guess he's waiting for me to have a great fall.
I think it's your egg-shaped head. I'm not endorsing Hannity's crappy jokes, but
Or maybe it has something to do with this egg shape on the top of my head.
Yeah, that's what it has to do with.
It is notable how the insults used on Fox get used in my Facebook feed, my Twitter feed. It does go to show the power that these stars have to shape public opinion. But I really appreciate the caller's point about the chyrons. These are the graphics on the bottom of the screen. They're known as chyrons or banners. Different TV shows handle these differently. For example, on my program, Reliable Sources, I view every banner before we go on the air, and I edit them and I make changes to them. So I am 100% responsible. If you don't like the banner on my show, it's my fault. But different shows handle these differently. And I think that CNN banner that the caller mentioned that said that there were fiery but mostly peaceful protests, that banner was probably a mistake. I don't know who wrote it, probably a young producer who's trying their best.
We see propaganda. Those things are always propaganda, and sensationalized.
Under deadline in a breaking news situation. But I think it's probably, that kind of thing becomes easily criticized and probably not the right banner to put on screen. What I would suggest to our caller is view CNN for a day. Don't view it for 10 seconds. Don't pick on the worst mistake made during the day.
So you actually think somebody could watch CNN for a whole day? That's torture. Watch it for 4 years, and then don't pick out the smaller details. You can't watch just a little bit. You got to watch it over a 4-year sample.
The day, because I know I make mistakes on the air. Everybody makes mistakes. Instead, try to view it in totality. Try to view it in context. And by the way, I try to do that for Fox News as well. I think it's unfair to cherry pick the most foolish moments or the most outlandish moments on a television network. Instead, try to look at the totality of it.
You're on the news. Don't look at all the mistakes and little, mistakes we make and whatever, sometimes it's a problem. You're in the news. You're supposed to be telling the truth. It's not that hard. We all make mistakes in the news. We miss information. But don't, let's look at the totality of the show. You guys have been obsessed with Trump. You're completely partisan. And so is all the other networks. Whenever I look at any of these, the news, so-called news, when I turn on the news, and whatever it is, doesn't matter what, it could be Newsmax or OAN, it could be, I don't really watch those when I turn them on, when I go through the channels, Fox News, or certainly MSNBC, but CNN is by far the worst. It's just complete bogus lies and, misinterpretation of what's going on. And it's almost like hostile. It's like a hostile assault on your intellect. It's so bogus. And I don't know how many people actually watch CNN and believe it. Maybe some older people. It's, the mainstream news is targeted at older people. Very few young people watch any sort of mainstream news. But it isn't like they're well informed. We already know that, right? About the youth of today. I can watch about 3 or 4 minutes of the news. What will happen is I'll eat breakfast or lunch and I'll turn on the news for a couple of minutes. And almost every time I do, I get an idea for a video. It's like that bad. Like there's never any time I'm like, well, that was interesting. Or they did a good job there. It's always, 100% suck.
But know that when mistakes happen, there are consequences. There is accountability. In fact, I had a tough conversation with one of my bosses last week because I made a mistake in my nightly newsletter.
Whoa, there are consequences. Did you hear that? He made a mistake in his newsletter reporting the news. He reported something that wasn't news, that was fake news because it was a mistake. And he had a tough conversation with his boss. Well, are you okay, Brian? Are you okay after that tough conversation? Are you okay, buddy? Buddy, like, you all right? My dog, who's named Buddy, is looking at me. Are you okay, Brian? You okay? It's a tough conversation. I know. Yeah, the tough conversation. When you make a mistake in not reporting the news correctly and you have a tough conversation with your boss. Are you okay? Look, how did it go, Brian? Was it okay? I want to know because, those tough conversations can be really tough.
And I'm better off for having that conversation. I think what we need more of in journalism are those checks and balances.
Yeah, that's so bad. You wrote a book called Hoax. You guys are 100%, Trump bashing news. Like even now, I mean, this is September 1st. It's right before the election. And he's talking about Fox News and Trump. I mean, he wrote a book. Like, that's what you're going to write a book about? And nobody's going to buy that book.
And those standards and practices so that when I do slip up, someone notices and we talk about it and I make sure it doesn't happen again.
Here's Derek in Lakeland, Minnesota. Good morning.
Good morning, C-SPAN. Good morning, America. So I just wanted to say thank you, C-SPAN, for having the CNN anchor on because over the last 3.5 plus months, we've gotten to see the exposure of how the Fourth Estate has completely been burned down. Brian, do you believe in polls?
I do believe in polls, yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, the last poll that I saw from a reliable source was that in 1970, let's talk about Walter Cronkite for a second, the United States believed that the media was giving them real factual information. A new poll just came out that said it's completely the opposite. So 80% believed in the media in 1970, and now 20% does. So 80% doesn't. So when I look at that, I look at this as very unreliable sources. And you guys always talk about how many times Trump has lied. I've calculated that I think with your chyrons, with, I don't know if there's any journalists left at CNN, but I know that, if I were to estimate about 300 different, distortions or misinformation that we get out of CNN, and you have to watch them in the airport, which is harsh. But if you added all that up to 46 months, it comes out to be 300,000 plus distortions of truth. So my thing is that you guys, this is how low you'll go, is that you went out and you made lies and you defamed a child, and then you had to settle out of court to pay this child for distorting information about this young individual.
So what he's saying here, I mean, this is, Brian Stelter at least went on C-SPAN, probably knew this might be coming. But Brian Stelter agreed with the guy that 80% of people don't trust the media because the media sucks. I mean, it's, they just want to say it's Fox and Trump did a good job at making everybody believe the media sucked. And, then you're saying that people are incredibly stupid, that Trump and Hannity can by the force of their will by their rhetoric can make everybody believe that CNN and MSNBC and the mainstream media is fake news. Well, that's, because you guys suck. Like if you guys were good at your job, no one would be able to plant the seeds of doubt, right? But what this guy's talking about was, and I forget the guy's name, that kid from Kentucky. Remember, there was these students that were at Washington, D.C., and a video came out, and this smug-looking little white kid was staring at some Native American guy, and it looked like, the kid was being a complete punk, right? That's how the video was edited, and the people at CNN, the shills at CNN, and all these other news networks were talking about what a punk the kid was. And so then there was all these other videos, like, social media videos that came out. And there was this group, I think they were called the Black Jewish Israelites or something. And these guys were, big adult men who had beards, and they were harassing everybody. Like, they were harassing every demographic, even other black people, and saying disparaging things, racially charged things, hateful things, brutal. And then there was a Native American group, and one of this elder walked up to these kids and started playing the drum in the kid's face, right? Started to beat the drum right in the kid's face, and that was the kid's reaction. was he ended up looking punky, and they edited all those other things out, and they just disparaged this kid as being some white privileged entitled punk kid. And so when these guys were yelling at them, these black Israelite guys, the kids ended up doing some sort of a school cheer because they were high school kids. And then, then that's when the drummer came over. The kids were singing some sort of, song that they, like the theme song to the school or whatever it was. And so this kid got so much hate and so much whatever. You guys remember the story that he ended up suing mainstream media and, won money. Like he won the lawsuit because they completely failed. They, distorted reality and attacked this kid by cherry picking the video footage. And there was a ton of video footage that came out. And so, Brian Stelzer, in the face of this thing, let's see what he has to say about it.
I would say, if anything that's happening at CNN and anybody who buys your book, it's really just one of those things that is dividing our nation. And I don't believe in dividing our nation. It hurts our great nation. And so CNN is really the enemy of the truth. And that's my opinion. Thank you.
Brian Stelter.
I'm grateful for the call, and I know that you're not the only person that feels this way. There has been a process of radicalization that's happened in this country with media bashing that is absolutely unprecedented.
Again, he's blaming it on Trump and Hannity and media bashing. The media sucks. It has nothing to do with what Trump said. There's the Trumpers and there's the QBs, and those people are going to be influenced by Trump and the right wing. So there's the right wing people. You take them out, like 20 to 30% of the population. And that doesn't explain the other, 50% of the people who don't like the news media, who don't think it's legitimate. Because when we turn it on, the rest of us, and we watch, even if people don't know the alternative narratives and they're not truthers, they can tell they're being manipulated. They can tell it's opinion-based news, and it all comes from one point of view. Like, it's the person who's obsessed with their ex. They go through a bad divorce, and that's all they talk about. That's all they say is how their ex ruined their life, this, that, and the other thing. And they have friends who, after a while, you just shut the F up about it. You move on, right? No, none of us want to hear it. Nobody wants. And this is how they've been about Trump for the past 5 years. And even, more so now because they're trying to find ways to talk about Trump. And it's not just the news media. It's Jimmy Kimmel's. It's the Hollywood culture. I mean, it's just about, every one of these people is still obsessed with Trump, and they talk more about Trump than they do about Biden, right? You got rid of the guy. You ganged up and you got rid of Trump, and you should be happy, but you're not. You're even more miserable.
20, 30 years ago, conservatives talked about media bias, and there were some really valid points to that critique. It is absolutely true that lots of journalists are based in New York and Washington. They're based in big cities. They have liberal leanings, and mainstream newsrooms are built to make sure that bias doesn't seep into the news coverage. And
are you serious? Did you seriously just say that? You guys are 100% biased, and it comes from it's not just some liberal and conservative bias. It's a part of an agenda, and that's the other thing. CNN gets most of their talking points and perspective from the intelligence community. It's like the extension of the CIA and to some extent the FBI. And they have people, former FBI and CIA people on their show. They get their news from that, movement. There's an agenda there. There's an agenda from the intelligence community. And CNN, worse than any other network, is, their whole formula, their template to their news is based in those, opinions and talking points and narratives. And people can see it. They can see they're being manipulated. They can see that all of these stories have a common theme or thread behind them.
And yet sometimes it does. I absolutely acknowledge that. I think it's different to talk about things as if they're enemies. No American is an enemy of another American. No news outlet is an enemy of America. And to say that, I think, does damage.
That's what I've seen Chris Cuomo say about Fox, and even your book about Trump and Fox. You were basically saying he was a second coming of Hitler or some Mussolini or Genghis Khan. I mean, you're basically saying he is some supervillain who was destroying America. Joe Biden campaigned on, his slogan was saving the soul of America, that Trump and Trump supporters were, I don't know, the devil and had exercised, were possessing the soul of America or something. And Joe Biden was the exorcist, and he was going to save the soul of America. So don't come out and say, it's very disparaging to say that media is the enemy of America. It's been your whole thing about Trump and the Trump supporters, your thing at CNN and your thing personally. You wrote a whole book about it. Like, don't come out like, oh, God, why can't we all just get along, right?
But here's my challenge to you, and I say this from a place of respect because everyone has my email address. I'm at bstelter@gmail.com. Go on to CNN.com, look at the transcripts for my show. If you go to CNN.com/transcripts, go through and look for what the lies are, and then point out the specific lie, and then we can have a conversation about what is the claim of a lie.
Really? Well, but gumballs. Can we count them in gumballs? And what he just said there was, then you point out all the lies, and then you and I could have a conversation about what are these accusations about lies, not about the lies, right? I can tell you how you're wrong and that there aren't any lies, and and that your accusation of lies are the problem. Like, you want to have one of those conversations? Why don't you comb through all of my transcripts to my shows, if you have some spare time, and point out all the lies and email them to me, and I'll tell you how they're not lies. Does that sound like fun to you? Yeah, see, I'm an open book. Okay, thankfully it's time to move on. So this is an interesting story. Lobster diver nearly swallowed by humpback has a whale of a tail. And according to this guy and his shipmates, he was diving down and checking his lobster pots. And he felt a bump, and all of a sudden he was completely, he had like scuba gear on, right? He had oxygen and things. And he was completely swallowed up. All he saw was black by a whale. First he thought it was a shark attack, but then he realized there was no teeth and he was in a whale's mouth or whatever it was. And so he started to fight his way out of there. And then the whale surfaced and spit him out. And his boat mates, the guys who were on his boat, saw this happen. And, either it's a lie or it's not, right? But, swallowed by a whale.
You once described President Trump as a bright person, talented. How would you describe President Biden?
Well, even now, I believe that former U.S. President, Mr. Trump, is an extraordinary individual, talented individual. Otherwise, he would not have become U.S. President. He's a colorful individual. You may like him or not. But he didn't come from the U.S. establishment. He had not been part of big-time politics before. And some like it, some don't like it. But that is a fact. President Biden, of course, is radically different from
Kablamo, like, that's fairly accurate, that Trump is, a person that came out of the business world, never held political office, and then won.
President Biden, of course, is radically different from Trump because President Biden is a career man. He has spent virtually his entire adulthood in politics. Just think of the number of years he spent in the Senate. A different kind of person. And it is my great hope that, yes, there are some advantages, some disadvantages, but there will not be any impulse-based movements on behalf of the sitting U.S. president.
We sat down.
No impulse-based movements. See what he said there, and this is a foreign leader. And this tells you everything you need to know about what, Brian Stelter was talking about. That you had Trump, and Trump was a reality TV star. And kind of a, he was a character, and not a character where you would say he would be a good president. Like, if you watch The Apprentice, and I watched The Apprentice on and off for years. I liked the show. I liked Trump as a character. I liked him as a presidential character. But it wasn't somebody I would say, hey, he'd make a good president, right? He had a lot of immature behaviors, petty. He went after people like Rosie O'Donnell on Twitter. Like, he couldn't lose some sort of a battle, a public media battle, very competitive and petty. A lot of qualities. Flim-flam man, a salesman who would overhype his products and things like this. Going into Trump Towers or even Trump's house, the gaudiness, the gold, over the top bling. I mean, just, not somebody that I would say he would make a good president. And I, of course, didn't vote for him. But the American people, a lot of them loved Trump for that very reason. That tells you everything you need to know about politics and the media, because they chose a guy who had no political experience because they have no faith in career politicians. And they chose a person that the media said couldn't win and shouldn't win, all the experts and pundits, and it showed that they had, no influence on the American people, right? And they had to bash Trump for, 4 years and, all the impeachment stuff, all the stuff that went around with Trump, right? All the things, negative things. And there's still some question about what happened there. And so it shows you that the American people have lost faith in career politicians and in the media. That's what Trump phenomenon shows you, that they want no part of those institutions. And clearly foreign leaders realize that. The American people, the media and the government have lost the American people. And that, is even more so now.
For a 90-minute interview inside the Kremlin, where I pressed him on accusations he has ordered assassinations of his adversaries.
The late John McCain in Congress called you a killer. When President Trump was told that you are a killer, he didn't deny it. When President Biden was asked whether he believes you are a killer, he said, I do. Mr. President, are you a killer?
Well, now that you mention it, I wasn't going to bring it up myself, but you asked this excellent question. It's just, what a great interviewer. I don't have any real evidence. I don't have any, but I just want to know if you want to confess and incriminate yourself.
Over my tenure, I've gotten used to attacks from all kinds of angles and from all kinds of areas under all kinds of pretext and reasons, and of different caliber and fierceness, and none of it surprises me. So as far as harsh rhetoric, I think that this is an expression of overall U.S. culture. Of course, in Hollywood, there are some underlying deep things in Hollywood, macho, which can be treated as cinematic art, but that is part of U.S. political culture where it's considered normal. By the way, not here. It is not considered normal here.
I don't think I heard you answer the question, the direct question, Mr. President.
See, when you are presidents and you are a country, a media for a country in America, American presidents, and you're the commander-in-chief of a country that spends 60% of our budget on war and weapons. I mean, on weapons. War is a totally different thing. Like, war is extra. That we have more weapons of mass destruction than any other country. That's our number one focus. Americans' number one focus is the war and the military. That's our number one governmental purpose. We have the strongest and most developed military in modern history. There's no other military that even comes close, right? The way that we think about the military, and then all the violence, like he said, in Hollywood. And so to call other leaders killers, Barack Obama, for example, droned people when Joe Biden was vice president, droned kids, like they dropped bombs. And it just, drones to me are like another level of evil because people don't even see it coming. There could be a drone like right above you in the sky. You don't even see it, right? And then all of a sudden it fires a missile. And then it's just completely depersonalized because the person on the other end is like they're playing a video game. And so for the American media to paint other leaders, like I believe that Putin probably murders dissenters. I don't know, right? Like I know people from Russia and people from the Ukraine, and they don't love their government or their leadership. Just like every other person in the world, people are waking up to their government being corrupt and, whatever it is. And so I don't know, what kind of person Putin is, but I do know that America is a very violent country. We push out violence on video games and on, in movies, and it's embedded in the culture. Football is a very violent game. All sports, very violent. MMA and boxing, right? there's just a lot of violence and a lot of, anger and things in America. And then there's the military, right?
I did answer. I will add if you let me. I've heard dozens of such accusations, especially during the period of some grave events during our counterterrorism efforts in North Caucasus. And when that happens, I'm always guided by the interests of the Russian people and Russian state. And sentiments in terms of who calls somebody whom, what kind of labels, this is not something I worry about in the least.
Let me give you some names. Anna Politkovskaya, shot dead.
Okay, so he's going to make a list, right? But, if the guy is a murderer, he's not going to admit to it. I mean, come on. Like, this is just, just the same thing with Brian Stelter. Why don't you go through my transcripts line by line and then email it back to me and we can have a discussion about what lies there are and what lies there aren't. He's not going to admit to lies. He's not going to admit that CNN sucks and he sucks. And so, why bother? That's why I'm not here to confront the people that are doing the damage. They believe in what they're doing. They all do. All of them have rationalized what they're doing. I'm not here to change the government or the media or Hollywood or really, anybody that's not open to changing themselves, the heartfulness meditation, where you change yourself. I mean, that's the only thing that you can control and change. You can be a better person. You can't make these stooges be a better person. So here are the world leaders coming together. Boom. Bang, they're coming off the ocean here. No masks. He's got a mask on. That guy doesn't. Why is that? Like, shouldn't you be able to agree on this? Shouldn't this have some sort of protocol, like, based in science? Boom, kablamo. And again, this is, the touching elbows is from when we were told that COVID passed from surface to surface contact, right? Remember when it was surface to surface contact and they were sure of it and we were supposed to wash our hands constantly and we were supposed to wipe down all surfaces and it was all about surface to surface contact. But that disappeared and then it became airborne, then it became an aerosol. And so this makes no difference because what the CDC says, I've been over this so much, is individual who has come in close contact within 6 feet for a total of 15 minutes. If you are in contact with a person who has either showed symptoms of COVID or is test positive for COVID, this is irrespective of whether the person with COVID-19 or the contact was wearing a mask or whether the contact was wearing respiratory PPE, then you're supposed to quarantine for 14 days. So this is fairly recently updated. This is what the CDC says is within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more. So it's not the shaking of the hands, right? It's whether the people have been within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more, and they certainly were at various times during this, right? They're all giving that little, woo, do it. Markles, woo, you got it. Boom, boom, yes, let's do it, yes. Yeah, kablamo, yeah, you got him. Do it, right? Boom, boom, yep, boom, ba-boom, boom, boom, ba-boom, ba-boom again. And then they all are spaced in Cornwall. Here they are hobnobbing with the Queen, right? And they're within 6 feet here. People are close together. And so, they're spread apart here, but not here, right? They're all intermingling. And so, what is it, right? So then there's this image with Joe Biden and Emmanuel Macron, we all crying together. Here they are at the G7. This has been confirmed. Body language expert analysis, world leader behavior at G7. Analyze, is that what analyze? No, analysis, I don't know. Wrong word for them. And so here they are with all their bogus, social distancing and elbow bumping. And there they are, right? Getting cozy before the big party tonight. Big eyes wide shut party. There it is, right? So much for social distancing and bumping elbows, JoJo Magoo. And we're back to Hunter Biden. Why isn't Hunter Biden being condemned for unacceptable use of the N-word? Now, I covered this earlier. They have his laptop and they found emails where he called his white lawyer the N-word in multiple exchanges. And I went through this in weird ways, right? Just, odd person. And Hunter Biden is the ultimate example of white privilege. He is somebody who is the son of a career politician and has been given cushy jobs in America and globally because of selling influence to his dad. Because he was a crackhead. He was smoking crack the whole time. And, impregnating strippers. So then I looked at the news media again here, right? Hunter Biden racial slur. And finally, we have a fact checker. Because here it says there's no, the only people who are covering it are on the right side. And so Snopes, who's the guy who runs Snopes, it was a couple, right? And, he had a partner, a woman partner. And he went, they were married. And he went to Vegas and then ended up having a relationship with a prostitute stripper and left his wife for her. And so this is the guy who's in charge of Snopes, right? He has similar tendencies to Hunter Biden. They have similar tastes in women. Did Hunter Biden call his lawyer the N-word in text? And it says screenshots allegedly show the president's son casually using the term with his attorney, who is white. And so it says rumor alert, right? And then they say unproven. Screenshots of text messages that emerged in June of 2021 authentically document Hunter Biden, who is white, calling his white lawyer the N-word. While no evidence corroborated or disproving this claim, it is noteworthy that only one political faction was circulating it. And they're basically saying this is right-wing propaganda. It's not the trusted news sources of CNN and MSNBC, but this guy who left his wife for a stripper, it's this organization is trying to say, well, it's not credible because it's only coming from like New York Post and those rags, is showing they're biased, right? Because if Hunter Biden didn't say this, he would deny it, and so would Joe Biden's team. And they would confront, this is a big thing to be saying. But they haven't denied that his hard drive, in fact, he said his big excuse, this is what they did with Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden went on Jimmy Kimmel's and said, and released this book that he was a crackhead and he didn't remember all these things that he did, including the hard drive from his Apple computer that he dropped in a tub. And he had done this numerous times. And so it was a bonehead move, and as far as I can tell, it's pretty much a fact that he dropped this laptop off. And so first they said it was Russian propaganda, and now they've backed off that. They're not saying that anymore. But when he was on, Jimmy Kimmel's, he said, well, I was smoking crack, so everything I did, I get a mulligan. And Jimmy Kimmel's was like, all right, yeah, you're such a brave man for coming out and saying you smoked crack. That was... And so that's their defense, that he smoked crack and that he's not going to address any of these allegations or any of the evidence they found because he was a crackhead and doesn't remember doing anything. And they're leaving it at that, right? He wrote a book about his crack addiction, and Joe Biden and Hunter Biden aren't talking about this, and the mainstream media isn't covering it. And this is a scandal. The guy almost certainly did use the N-word, and these are his legitimate emails, because everything else that they've put out from his laptop has been legitimized in one way or another. And the fact that they're being silent about it shows you that they know that it's true. And so the mainstream media not covering it is a condemnation of them and their one-sidedness. So I was going to add this exclusive coverage of Alec Baldwin and finding out about his wife's scandal that she wasn't from Spain. But this video got too long and took too much time, so I will either put that video out tonight or I'll put it out tomorrow, and you guys can look forward to that. Exclusive footage of Ghoul Whisperer Alec Baldwin and his Spanish wife from Boston, and they're dealing with the scandal. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, death reporting from the Apocalaughsnow and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day, and be grateful.